So you've played D&D, you've seen some Critical Role, hoarded dice, watched some class rankings, and probably at some point realised just how many other TTRPGs there are out there. 36,069 on itch alone as of writing. No recommendation thread on Reddit can ever cover the breadth of this hobby, and if you've already started that journey, you'll know just how deep that rabbit hole goes. And if you're just branching out from D&D now, well, I'm excited for you. So where do you start? Well, here's a fun idea. Why don't we consult D&D itself? In the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide, right at the beginning, it talks about 7 different reasons people enjoy Dungeons & Dragons. Maybe we can use that as a jumping off point, because there are definitely games out there that cater specifically to those things you enjoyed about D&D. These aren't pigeonholes. I don't think people can be divided up into 7 neat categories, but you'll probably recognise yourself in a few of these. I'm going to start with an easy-ish one, optimising. And you know who you are. You're either the last one to finish a character sheet because you spent 3 hours planning out what feat to pick up at what level, or the first one to finish because you already had a dozen character concepts ready to go. And an important distinction for me is that we're not talking about finding the most broken build, not necessarily. We're talking about finding those fun little synergies, specialising in a role, or just the joy of bringing the fiction of a character to life through the mechanics. So for that particular kind of joy, we're looking for a bit of traditional crunch, rather than games that market themselves as rules light or having super quick character creation. And let's get this out of the way here, because Pathfinder is an obvious choice. If you like feats in D&D, you'll probably love this. Everything is a feat, and you're constantly choosing from long lists of feats at every level to build up that character. Another game to look at is Lancer, which has the added customization layer of your mech's frame and loadout. And already we've stumbled onto a bit of a theme here. Both of these games are heavily influenced by 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, which might be something to bear in mind when looking for that kind of modern crunch. 13th Age is a little like Pathfinder, but more streamlined and focused on story. Beacon and Icon both use the Lancer rule set for more of a JRPG/anime fantasy feel. And talking of which, my favourite for this kind of feel is Fabula Ultima, where multiclassing is actually required. Essentially, you build your own class by mixing a unique palette of options. And bias on the table here, I doubt this is the last time we'll see Fabula Ultima in this video. So let's move on to fighting, and already I've hit a little snag in our gimmick. According to the Dungeon Master's Guide, fighters like kicking the tar out of villains and monsters and look for any excuse to start a fight, favouring bold action over careful deliberation. But over here it says instigators are eager to make things happen, even if that means taking perilous risks. They would rather rush headlong into danger and face the consequences than face boredom. These sound like very similar motivations to me. It might seem obvious to you, but it took me a while to figure out what's different about these, and I think my confusion comes from a subtle assumption I was making. In traditional games, there's often 2 modes of play: freeform role-playing and tactical combat. Some games have no distinction at all though, and some games treat action scenes and combat scenes just the same. I suspect the assumption in D&D is that non-violent action scenes use the free-form role-playing game mode, and fighting is restricted to the tactical mode. So when the Dungeon Master's Guide talks about favouring bold action, it's specifically talking about players who enjoy tactical combat. I hope that makes sense, but it actually brings up another problem, which is that a lot of the games that do tactical combat well, I've already mentioned. But that's okay, there's probably just a large crossover. I'll bring up Lancer again because it's a great example of a design philosophy that treats freeform role-playing and squad tactics as almost two separate games. The non-combat mode is influenced by more narrative games like Blades in the Dark, and combat is more video gamey and influenced by 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons. But another game I haven't mentioned that does this clear separation thing is Draw Steel. I'm not super familiar with it, but I do know that the instant someone draws steel, the game snaps to a strict grid to remove any ambiguity and make the most out of positioning. So what about instigating then? What about rushing headlong into danger? Well, what if I continue the logical path I set out for myself before? If fighting is about having a clear boundary and methodical tactical rules, maybe instigating is about removing that boundary so that anything can happen at any time, where chaos and danger are a constant part of the game. I think Daggerheart is something of a mirror image to Draw Steel in that respect. It has a lot of the traditional classes and abilities, but has no line between combat and open play, no initiative, just some rules about when the GM can intervene and shine a spotlight on an enemy. And to add to the chaos and danger, the roles have an additional dimension beyond just passing and failing. Taking action always carries a risk of something going wrong, even if you succeed. And talking of things going wrong, let's dip a toe into the more modern narrative scene and look at games like Blades in the Dark. Again, there's no particular separation between combat action and open play, and if fighting in D&D is about methodical tactical planning, Blades in the Dark is the opposite. It dumps you right into the fray with a flashback mechanic instead, where during the action you can retroactively declare how you would have planned for this scenario. So you really can leap from a tower without thinking, then decide on the way down how you might have prepared for this moment. It also uses countdown clocks and stress to keep the tension high, and all that can lead to everything going wrong all the time. And it's worth looking at other games in the Forged in the Dark family for this too, like Scum and Villainy for more space heists and smuggling runs, for example, and as of writing, I'm looking forward to trying out a few myself. Viewers picked out Songs for the Dusk for me to review, which is a science fantasy game, and I recently got this review copy of Echoes of the Veil, a cyberpunk resistance game with some weird fantasy elements. Now, very quickly before we move on to exploration, a short and maybe quite fitting ad for all you setting explorers out there. Years and years ago, I used to coordinate the storyline for a video game with a vast and complicated setting, and having a wiki with interconnected pages to keep track of all the lore was essential. And looking at the world building tool World Anvil, it seems to have all that and so much more. Interactive maps, stat blocks, character sheets, timelines. It even has GM screens and access controls so you can happily write the deep lore of your setting without spoiling the big reveals for your players. And what's really cool is they've actually given me a discount code to give out to you guys. So if you go to worldanvil.com or follow the link in the description, you can use the code COZY to get a whole 51% off any yearly subscription. I haven't used it yet myself, but it looks like a really handy tool for GMs and world builders. So I hope that code's useful, and thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. Let's head then to more familiar territory with exploring. Surely that one's simple. The Dungeon Master's Guide says that folks who enjoy exploration want to experience wonders. They want to know what's around the next corner. They want hidden clues and treasure. So this isn't just about travelling from one place to another or uncovering maps. It's about a much broader sense of wonder and discovery. So not simple at all. These aren't easy things to bake into a game, especially if you want to cover all those bases. Let's start simple though. Hex crawls are quite popular in exploration-focused games, where you travel across a map from hex to hex and either generate what you find there or look up existing information about the location. You'll find hex crawls everywhere, from more well-known titles like Forbidden Lands to some of my favourite massively underrated games like Midnight Muscadines and Astro Prisma. But putting aside my biases for a second, one of the best implementations of a hex crawl I've ever seen was in Land of Eam, a whimsical fantasy adventure game inspired by Jim Henson movies like Labyrinth and Dark Crystal. And the reason it's easily one of the best is that the campaign setting, Mucklands, comes with this really high quality fold out hex map, and without any prep at all, you can just pick an interesting hex to start in, look up its entry in the book, and it'll have all kinds of fun stuff to discover here. Fun NPCs with portraits and quests, quirky factions, local events and intrigue, and you can just go, start exploring the Mucklands, finding out what's over the next hill or in the next town. Of course, hex crawls aren't the only way of doing things, and I also really enjoy card-based exploration systems, where you lay out a map or legs of a journey with face-down cards, and reveal each location when you get there, usually by looking up that card's entry on a table. Some games get quite interesting and abstract with it, like Rillem's cards representing a screen in a 90s adventure video game, or Firelight's doing a similar thing but with a Metroidvania feel. But I have to give special mention here to Mappa Mundi, an ecology-focused exploration game that uses quite an abstract but immersive card system. The idea is that you explore the world to find and study these majestic monsters. Think Monster Hunter or Shadow of the Colossus without the slaying. As you research and prepare for each quest, the GM builds a deck of cards to represent the journey you'll need to make. Then for each leg of that journey, the card's artwork tells you what you encounter. That visual aspect is pretty good for that sense of wonder I mentioned, although the environments themselves in Mappa Mundi are relatively mundane. So one last mention for sense of wonder, which is Numenera. This was the first TTRPG I played that wasn't a Wizards of the Coast title, and what drew me to it was exploration. It was designed around that exploration pillar of play. In fact, this second edition leaned into that and came in two core books, one called Discovery for exploration and one called Destiny for community building. The idea is that in the very, very, very far future, after 8 extremely technologically advanced civilizations have risen and fallen, you're now exploring the weird detritus they left behind, where absolutely everything is a wonder. You might live on a continent-sized megastructure that still functions, whirring away deep underground, but you'll never understand its true purpose. Only the bizarre side effects of the reality-warping flowers that grow on its surface, or the strange mutant creatures that maintain the mechanism. And that's just one layer. Wherever you are, there'll be at least 7 other incomprehensible artifacts built on top. And built into the system is that hidden treasure aspect of exploration that the DMG mentioned. You'll find and collect utterly weird portable artifacts whose true purpose is a mystery, but definitely do something useful when activated. Honestly, I was a little sad to see Monty Cook relegated Numenera to just a campaign setting in the Cypher system that it spawned. The setting was always its strength, I guess, but I would have liked to see the system develop into something more modern and truly exploration-focused. We're moving from a surprisingly complex motivation to a deceptively simple one here: problem solving. The Dungeon Master's Guide says problem solvers want to scrutinize NPC motivations, untangle a villain's machinations, solve puzzles, and come up with plans. I say it's deceptively simple because there's an entire design philosophy that caters to it, and that is the old school or new school Renaissance. I say that because a lot of modern narrative games might have an ability called something like deduce motivation that you can trigger to get a clue, and to an extent the OSR is a reaction against that. Games designed in that space tend to want you, the player, to use your own cunning to figure out solutions rather than rely on what they see as pressing a button to solve a problem. And theoretically, that gives you a more satisfying sense of achievement when you've used all your wits and resources to engineer a creative solution to a puzzle that will make this dungeon a bit easier for your party. So, oddly, this is about stripping away mechanics and relying on the GM rather than having complex rules for every situation. I'm not as familiar with this playstyle as I am with others, although I did play Morkin recently, which felt very much like a long puzzle to solve. Otherwise, I always hear good things about Exalted Funeral titles for this sort of thing. Dolmenwood has a weird and wonderful bestiary of creatures that seem like puzzles to solve to me, and Old School Essentials seems like a must if you enjoy that classic dungeon crawling and puzzle solving experience. Storytelling next, and the DMG says players who love storytelling want to contribute to a narrative. They like it when their characters are heavily invested in an unfolding story, and they enjoy encounters that are tied to and expand on an overarching plot. Collaborative storytelling is a big thing in the indie scene, and often not catered to very well by traditional games. But how do those smaller games manage it? Well, the usual way is by making the GM just another player with some facilitating duties and their own set of rules rather than having grand authority over the story. You'll see that kind of thing in games inspired by Apocalypse World that have GM moves or metacurrencies they can spend to intrude on the story that the players are telling and insert obstacles for them to overcome. You can see that sort of thing happening in modern games like Daggerheart. Like I mentioned before, the GM collects fear points from players' rolls and then spends them to do things like spotlight an enemy in combat or introduce a twist. Games like that are probably a good stepping stone if you're used to D&D because in a lot of ways the GM role is still quite traditional and is expected to provide the narrative framework rather than just leaving it up to the players. My favourite example for that kind of traditional but also very collaborative style is Fabula Ultima, where players can earn Fabula points that they can spend to introduce new elements to a story. That can be as simple as spotting a conveniently placed chandelier in a fight, or as complex as adding an NPC or even a town. The players and the GM build the setting and story together, both in that way and in Session 0, where the responsibility for world building is shared equally. And these things that the DMG suggests for storytellers, using backgrounds to shape the story and giving characters ideals, bonds and flaws, are at the heart of the Fabula Point system, where you can invoke your background or your bonds to improve your role, and villains can do the same. Of course, you can go further into this collaborative style with GM optional story games too, but I kind of wanted to talk about that in the next section. Acting was a bit of a tricky one for me to differentiate from storytelling. The DMG says actors enjoy getting into character, speaking in their character's voice, and enjoy social interactions with NPCs, monsters, and fellow party members. At first glance, that seems like a very similar motivation to storytelling, where your character's character matters. But my view on this changed a bit recently when I played a game called Oceania 2084. This is very much a collaborative story game, like I mentioned before. There's no traditional GM. Instead, one player has a different set of rules than the others, acting as big brother and trying to catch the other players in thought crimes, almost like an asymmetric PvP game. And yet, this game was so much more about acting as a character than other tabletop games I've played, in a way that's difficult to describe, but reminded me a lot of the character-focused social role-playing I used to do in MMOs. And the reason for that was, when you don't have a GM to structure the plot or set the scenery, everything becomes about the character. The game itself and the interactions between the players form the plot and the setting. And there is a much more well-known game that does this in Wanderhome, a game I didn't really enjoy, but I can see that aspect in. And I think that other games that are GM-less in some way are probably best for this kind of social role-playing. The kind of role-playing where you might just hang out in a tea shop for the whole session, but it's still exciting and tense. I haven't played it yet, but Good Society looks perfect for that kind of thing. Social intrigue and passing notes at formal parties. And I hear there's a second edition coming out soon too. I've heard great things about The Between, a Victoria-era Monster Hunters game, where you'll all learn about each character's dark backstory as you play. And I think I want to mention Midnight Muscadines here again, because you can have a deck of cards act as the GM for you in that game, and the setting provides both those quiet social moments in tea houses and libraries that are really good for character-focused roleplay, but also the action and exploration that you might be used to in traditional games. So, is this a good way of thinking about games? Well, I don't usually put much stock in models that divide people into types like this, so I hope this video doesn't come across like a "which type of player are you" personality test, but I found it useful not to think of these as types of people, but as modes of play, some of which you'll enjoy more than others depending on the situation. And when I started thinking in terms of modes of play, then it became more clear how different games are designed for that kind of play, and not just one kind of play, but multiple. I actually found that way of thinking a lot more helpful than the original intent of this page, and actually I wondered a little bit about what the intention was here. It's a bit like D&D wants to be a game for all occasions and all kinds of people. And that's certainly how a lot of people talk about it. But having long since left D&D behind, I don't think I can go back. Call me an explorer type, but I just love discovering all these hundreds of games out there that specialize in one or two of these modes of play, or even in modes that had never occurred to me before. And really, that journey of discovery is why I make these videos, hoping that other people will find my rambling maps of the hobby useful. That, and I need an excuse to actually read and play some of the games on my shelves. It's not a shelf of shame, I don't think of it that way. They're just there waiting for me to explore. I've talked very briefly about a lot of games today, but nowhere near the over 36,000 that exist, and no matter how much time I have, games get released faster than I can possibly cover them. So while you're waiting for me to get through that list, don't forget to check out other small creators covering lesser known games. I've had a list of small channels you might enjoy on the channel homepage for ages now, and never thought to mention it until now. And a particular shout out to friend of the channel, Sacred Art of Gaming, who did an overview of Daggerheart from a solo roleplayer's perspective this week that might be of interest, since I did mention Daggerheart a couple of times in this video. And of course, a huge thank you to all the supporters on Patreon and Ko-fi for their continued and amazing kindness. If you enjoy these videos and feel eager and able to support too, then please head over to Ko-fi or patreon.com/cozyrpgreviews. Back to normal reviews, I think, next time, possibly with the game that supporters voted for, Songs for the Dusk. So, until then, happy adventures.